Welcome to Books in 10. Remember, we're raffling an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. Like, subscribe. Spinoza presents a vision of ethical living through this deep rational thought and understanding. Join us as we unpack Spinoza's ideas on God, freedom, and the pursuit of peace. Remember, we're raffling an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. Like, subscribe, and journey with us into the mind of one of philosophy's great thinkers. We're ready to deep dive into Spinoza's ethics.
Let's do it.
Now, I know ethics might sound a bit dry at first, but trust me, this is a wild ride. Spinoza basically sets out to build a whole ethical system from scratch, and he does it by trying to understand God and nature through pure reason.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical self-help book. Ethics is more about understanding the universe and our place in it and how that understanding can lead us to a more fulfilling life.
And get this, we're focusing on parts 1, 2, and 3. God, the mind, and emotions. Heavy stuff, right?
Absolutely. And Spinoza jumps right in with a bold claim. God is one and God is infinite.
Okay, wait. One substance in the entire universe. So we're not talking about the God you pray to, but more like the underlying force of all existence.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Every wave in the ocean is distinct yet inseparable from the ocean itself. Spinoza says God is like that ocean, the fundamental substance from which everything arises. Not a guy with a beard on a cloud, but the very fabric of reality itself.
So instead of looking for God in a temple or a text, you're looking for the divine spark within every atom of existence. Pretty radical, right?
Definitely a shift from the traditional view. And this idea leads Spinoza to another fascinating conclusion. Everything is determined.
Wait, hold up. Are you saying no free will? Everything is just playing out according to some cosmic script? That's a bit unsettling.
It can feel that way at first, but Spinoza's argument is that everything, including our choices, unfolds according to the necessity of God's nature. He even uses a mind-bending analogy. He says believing substance is created is as illogical as believing a false idea is true.
So if God is everything and everything flows from God's nature, there's no room for random chance or for us to have this independent free will. It's all part of a bigger picture.
Precisely. And that interconnectedness has huge implications for how we see ourselves and the universe.
Okay, my mind is already bending a bit here. But where does the mind fit into all of this? If the physical world is part of this determined system, are our thoughts and feelings determined too?
That's where Spinoza gets even more interesting. He argues that the mind and body aren't separate at all. They're two sides of the same coin.
Really? I always felt like my mind was this separate thing, distinct from my body.
That's a very common perception. But Spinoza uses a geometric analogy to explain this. Think about the idea of a circle in its actual form. They're inseparable, right?
He says it's the same with mind and body. The mind is the idea of the body, and the body is the object of the mind, existing simultaneously, just under different attributes.
So like two expressions of the same underlying reality. I'm starting to see how radically different Spinoza's view is. And this interconnectedness has huge implications for how we understand our emotions, which is where part 3 of ethics comes in. Spinoza created a whole system for categorizing emotions, and it's surprisingly relevant even today.
Okay, I'm intrigued. He had a whole system. I need details.
He broke emotions down into 3 primary categories: pleasure, pain, and desire. And he argued that all other emotions, love, hate, joy, fear, all of them are just variations or combinations of these 3 core emotions.
It's like primary colors that can be mixed to create a whole spectrum of other colors.
Exactly. And here's a key takeaway from Spinoza. Emotions aren't inherently good or bad. It's how we understand and manage them that makes all the difference.
That's fascinating. So it's not about suppressing emotions, but more about gaining a deeper understanding of their causes and how they influence us. Almost like if we could trace the root of our anger, we can choose how to respond to it.
You're getting it. Spinoza believed that this understanding allows us to moderate our emotions and live more rationally. And this leads us to one of the most powerful concepts in ethics: the path to freedom and happiness.
Hold on, back up a sec. Earlier, we were talking about everything being determined. So if everything's already set in motion, where does choice even come in? How can we choose to act ethically if everything's predetermined?
That's the paradox, isn't it? But for Spinoza, freedom doesn't come from some magical ability to defy the laws of nature. It comes from understanding and accepting those laws.
Freedom through understanding. Okay, explain this to me like I'm 5 years old.
Imagine you're a puppet being tossed around by external forces, reacting emotionally without even realizing it. Are you truly free? Or are you just dancing to someone else's tune?
Definitely not free. More like a puppet on someone else's string.
But when you see those strings, when you understand the forces influencing you, your emotions, your past, even social structures, you gain a level of freedom. You're not just being tossed around anymore. You can start to navigate.
So freedom through understanding, not freedom from the rules of the game. I'm starting to see it.
Precisely. And that understanding helps us make choices aligned with our true nature, with reason, and ultimately with God nature itself. That, according to Spinoza, is the path to freedom and happiness.
Wow. That's a lot to unpack. I think we've just scratched the surface of Spinoza's ethics,
Yeah.
but already my mind is buzzing. What stands out to you the most from part one?
What's fascinating to me is how Spinoza takes these seemingly disparate concepts, God, determinism, mind-body connection, emotions, and weaves them into this interconnected web of ideas. He's building towards a vision of ethical living that is truly unique.
I agree. It's not just about being good in a traditional sense. It's about understanding the universe and using that understanding to live a more fulfilling life.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a call to shift our perspective, to move beyond seeing ourselves as isolated individuals with free will and embrace the interconnectedness of all things.
It's almost like he's saying true freedom might lie in accepting what we can't control and focusing on cultivating understanding and wisdom. But how do we do that? How do we take these lofty philosophical ideas and apply them to our daily lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and luckily Spinoza offers some guidance, but we'll have to dive into that in part 2 of our deep dive. So we've established that Spinoza sees the universe as this determined system where everything flows from the nature of God nature. But then how can we even talk about ethics? If we don't have free will in the traditional sense, how can we be held accountable for our actions? It seems like a contradiction.
Right. It feels like Spinoza might be saying ethics don't really matter if everything's predetermined.
Right.
But as you delve deeper into ethics, you realize he's actually laying the foundation for a very different kind of ethical framework.
One that's rooted in understanding rather than a set of rigid rules. It's not about following commandments from a higher power or worrying about punishment. It's about understanding the nature of reality and aligning ourselves with it.
So how do we even begin to align ourselves with this massive, determined system? Where do we even start?
Well, Spinoza argues that the more we understand God nature, the more we understand the causes influencing our actions. Remember, he sees God and nature as the same thing, the single substance that is everything.
So the more we understand this fundamental substance, the more we understand ourselves and why we do the things we do.
Exactly. And the less we're swayed by those external forces and fleeting emotions, we become less like those puppets you mentioned earlier.
Okay, that makes sense. But what does that actually look like in practice? How does this understanding actually translate into living a more ethical life?
Spinoza points out that everything in nature strives to persevere in its own being. He calls this kenosis.
So like a survival instinct, but bigger than that, right?
Yes, it's more than just basic survival. It's about fulfilling our potential as human beings, becoming the best versions of ourselves. And for humans, that striving is guided by reason.
Because unlike rocks or plants, we have this capacity to think, to rationalize.
Exactly. Spinoza sees humans as a part of nature, but we have this unique ability to reason. And through reason, we can understand what's truly beneficial for us in the long run.
So it's not about chasing short-term pleasure or giving in to every impulse. It's about thinking long-term, making choices that help us thrive.
Exactly. Spinoza would say that blindly following your passions without examining them is being controlled by them, not acting from a place of understanding.
I'm starting to see the connection here. So to live ethically, we need to use reason to figure out what truly serves our long-term well-being, what's truly in our best interest.
You got it. And here's where it gets really interesting. Spinoza argues that what's truly beneficial for us individually is also what's beneficial for others.
There's that interconnectedness idea again. It all loops back around.
It does. Since we're all part of this one substance, our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of the whole.
So acting ethically isn't just about being a good person in some abstract sense. It's about recognizing that what's good for me is ultimately good for everyone else too.
Exactly. And that leads Spinoza to advocate for specific virtues like justice, generosity, and honesty, not because some external authority said so, but because these qualities create a more harmonious society, which in turn benefits every individual.
It's a virtuous cycle. When we act in accordance with reason, we're not just being nice, we're promoting the well-being of the whole. which ultimately circles back to ourselves.
Precisely. It's a very different way of thinking about ethics, rooted in understanding our place in the grand scheme of things.
I like how it flips the script on selflessness. It's not self-sacrifice, but a kind of enlightened self-interest. But I still have a nagging question about this whole determinism thing. If everything's already set in motion, where does choice come in? How can we choose to act ethically if everything's predetermined?
That's the million-dollar question that Spinoza grapples with. And remember, he's not saying we have this magical ability to choose whatever we want, regardless of all the causes acting on us. It's not about ignoring reality.
Right, it's not that kind of free will where we just get to snap our fingers and make anything happen.
Exactly. Instead, he says true freedom comes from understanding those causes, the forces acting on us.
So the more we understand the rules of the game, the more free we are to play it. That seems almost backwards.
I know it's a mind bender. But think about it this way. If you're unaware of the forces shaping your thoughts and actions, are you truly making choices? Or are you just blindly reacting?
I guess you could say that's not real choice. It's more like running on autopilot, reacting to whatever life throws at you.
Exactly. But when you understand those forces, your emotions, your past experiences, the social structures around you, you gain a level of freedom. You're no longer just being tossed around by the waves you can learn to surf.
So it's freedom through understanding, not freedom from determinism. I'm starting to see how radical this idea is.
It is radical, and that understanding allows us to make choices aligned with our true nature, with reason, and ultimately with God nature itself.
So in a way, Spinoza is saying that the more we understand this determined system, the more we can work within it to achieve our goals.
Yes. We're not denying the deterministic nature of reality. We're embracing it, learning the rules of the game so we can play it skillfully.
So we're not just pieces on a chessboard.
Yeah.
We can learn the moves, develop strategies. We can become grandmasters of our own lives.
That's a great analogy. And for Spinoza, the ultimate prize in this game of life is what he calls blessedness, a state of lasting peace and joy that comes from fully understanding and accepting our place in the universe.
And that blessedness is tied to that intellectual love of God nature that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And again, for Spinoza, this isn't a sentimental, touchy-feely kind of love. It's a deep intellectual understanding and appreciation of the interconnectedness of all things.
It's seeing the beauty and perfection of the universe, even in its determined nature.
Exactly. It's about awe, about understanding the magnificent complexity of the system we're all a part of. That's what Spinoza sees as the ultimate source of human happiness.
Okay, that's a beautiful thought, but it also raises a lot of questions for me. For example, if this blessedness is the ultimate goal, how do we actually cultivate it? Is it something we can just choose to feel, or does it require a certain way of life?
That's a great question, and it's something Spinoza addresses in the later parts of Ethics. He actually lays out a whole path for cultivating this intellectual love of God nature and achieving blessedness. But that's a deep dive for another time.
Well, I'm already intrigued, so just to recap, Spinoza is saying that ethical living is not about following external rules or chasing fleeting pleasures. It's about understanding the nature of reality, aligning ourselves with reason, and cultivating a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. It's about understanding the game and playing it well.
And that understanding can lead to true freedom and happiness, even within a determined system. It's about becoming active agents in our own lives rather than passive recipients of external forces.
Spinoza is basically saying that true freedom comes from understanding the game and playing it skillfully, even if we can't change the rules of the game.
Exactly. And the more we understand, the more effectively we can play.
That's a powerful message. But before we get too carried away with our newfound Spinozan freedom, let's shift gears and explore the practical implications of all of this. How can we actually apply these ideas to our lives today?
That's the question we'll tackle in part 3 of our deep dive into Spinoza's ethics, turning theory into practice.
Okay, so we're back, ready to tackle the age-old question. So what? We've explored Spinoza's ideas on God, determinism, the mind-body connection, even touched on his concept of blessedness. But how do we actually apply all of this to our lives? This can't just be some heady intellectual exercise, right?
Absolutely not. Spinoza was very concerned with the practical implications of his philosophy. He wasn't just trying to create a theoretical system, you know? He wanted to understand how these ideas could lead to a more fulfilling and ethical life. He wanted to give us tools we could actually use.
So how do we go from these abstract concepts to, like, concrete actions? Give us the Spinozan self-help guide, SparkNotes version.
Okay, well, first, remember that for Spinoza, freedom comes from understanding. So step 1, cultivate that understanding. Become a student of your own mind, your own body. Pay attention to your emotions, your habits, your reactions. Try to understand what's driving them, the causes behind them.
So it's about developing, like, self-awareness, being more mindful of our internal states, like noticing when you're getting irritated in traffic and thinking, okay, why am I feeling this way? Is it really the traffic or is it something else?
Exactly. And that mindfulness can help us start to disentangle ourselves from those like reactive patterns that often lead to suffering. When you can see the cause of your anger, for example, you can start to choose a different response. You're not just a slave to your emotions, you have options.
So it's not about suppressing emotions, but understanding them so we can make more conscious choices. I can see how that would be powerful.
It is. And that brings us to step two, aligning ourselves with reason. Spinoza saw reason as our guiding light, our compass for navigating life's challenges.
But how do we know what's truly rational? Seems like, different people can justify all sorts of crazy things in the name of reason.
That's true, which is why Spinoza emphasized the importance of clear and distinct ideas. We need to examine our beliefs, our values, even our definition of reason itself. Are we being truly rational, or are we just, rationalizing our pre-existing biases and desires?
So it's about constantly questioning our assumptions, being open to new perspectives, not getting stuck in our own echo chambers.
Absolutely. Reason isn't about blindly following dogma or like clinging to rigid beliefs. It's about being willing to engage in honest self-reflection and to be open to changing our minds when presented with new information. It's about being intellectually humble.
Okay. I'm liking this Spinozan self-help guide so far. So,
Yeah.
self-awareness, reason.
Hmm.
What's next? Give me step 3 on the path to Spinozan fulfillment.
Step three, and this is perhaps the most challenging one, is to cultivate that intellectual love of God nature that we talked about earlier.
Yes, the L word. This part always throws me for a loop. It sounds so abstract, and dare I say it, a little touchy-feely for a guy who is all about reason and logic.
I know what you mean. But remember, for Spinoza, this isn't about, some sentimental anthropomorphic notion of God. It's about understanding and appreciating the interconnectedness of all things, the inherent beauty and order of the universe.
So it's more about, like, awe and wonder than about worship. Like looking up at the night sky and feeling a sense of wonder at the vastness of it all.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're a part of something much larger than ourselves, something that transcends our individual egos and desires, and finding joy in that.
And how do we actually cultivate that? Do we need to, like, meditate in nature or read Spinoza every day?
It's not necessarily about specific practices, although those can be helpful. It's more about a fundamental shift in perspective,
Yeah.
choosing to see the world through a lens of interconnectedness, of appreciating that intricate web of cause and effect that makes up reality.
So it's about seeing the beauty in the everyday, even in the mundane, finding that sense of wonder in the simple things.
Exactly, and recognizing that even the challenges and difficulties we face are part of this larger order. Spinoza would say that even pain and suffering can ultimately serve a purpose in the grand scheme of things. It's all part of this, like, grand, interconnected system.
That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, especially when you're, like, in the midst of a personal crisis.
Yeah,
It's hard to see the bigger picture when you're in the thick of it.
I agree, but that's where the power of understanding comes in. When we can see our struggles as part of a larger tapestry, we can start to find meaning and even a strange sense of peace within them.
It's about, like, letting go of that illusion of control, embracing the flow of reality, even when it's turbulent.
Exactly. And that acceptance for Spinoza is the key to achieving true blessedness.
And that blessedness isn't some far-off goal. It's something we can experience, like here and now.
Absolutely. It's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment. It's about cultivating moments of peace, joy, and connection in the midst of everyday life. It's about seeing the world with new eyes and finding meaning and purpose within the deterministic nature of reality itself.
So it's not about escaping the game, but learning to play it with more skill and awareness. To appreciate the game itself, even with its challenges.
Precisely. And that's what makes Spinoza's ethics so relevant, even centuries later. It's not just a philosophical treatise, it's a guidebook for living a more fulfilling and meaningful life, even in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
It's a reminder that true freedom doesn't come from defying reality, but from understanding it, from accepting it, from seeing the beauty in it.
And from that understanding, we can cultivate a sense of peace, purpose, and connection that transcends those fleeting pleasures and pains of the material world.
Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up our deep dive into Spinoza's ethics. It's been challenging, thought-provoking, and ultimately inspiring. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I agree. Spinoza's ideas are like a puzzle box. They take time to unpack, but the rewards are well worth the effort.
We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a taste of the richness and depth of Spinoza's thought. And maybe, just maybe, it sparked a desire to explore these ideas further on your own.
Because ultimately, the true value of philosophy lies not in memorizing concepts, but in applying them to our lives. So as you go about your day, ask yourself, how can I cultivate more understanding? How can I align myself with reason? And how can I find that sense of wonder and connection in the midst of the everyday?
Those are great questions to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Spinoza's ethics. And remember, the journey of understanding is just beginning.